Yeah, because we'll talk about, because there was definitely one that a lot of people talked about was your claim to fame was I think the best bourbon you ever made was the 2011 single barrel.
I think I had the year wrong on that too. I think it was 2012.
Well, good.
I didn't
we'll
know
get the real story.
asked.
We'll get the real story.
Bringing to you the best stories from icons in the bourbon industry, it's Bourbon Pursuit. Now here are your hosts, Ryan and Kenny.
Hey guys, Ryan here with Bourbon Pursuit. The next couple weeks we have a 2-part episode with Jim Rutledge from Four Roses. So we have episode 1 this week and episode 2 the following. Enjoy. Thank you.
Always find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from at the lowest price, it's easy to find your favorite Cabernet or a new single barrel bourbon to try with some help from one of their friendly guides. And with every bottle comes the confidence of knowing you just found something amazing. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, find what you love and love what you find only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly and be 21.
Play Whiskey Wednesday, Round 11, the memory game. Until June 26, each week you can win one of our 12 incredible grand prizes. Select 2 doors at checkout. And if they match on drawing night, you'll win that bottle. Not a match? No worries. You still score a Weller 12-year. Every $5 ticket gives you 5 chances to win, including 4 weekly bonus prizes. Get your tickets now at give270.org. Charitable Gaming License ORG 0002703.
Ed Bly and Rising Tide Spirits are back again with a new release of Old Stubborn Bourbon. And this release of Old Stubborn is a premium hand marriage of 10, 11, and 12-year cask strength, barely filtered pot still bourbon. It comes in at a staggering 123.8 proof. And the flavoring grain for this one, which the last one was wheated, but this time it's now rye. Rich, sweet, and bold with a long finish that's sure to be another eye-opener. You can order online at Sealbox or thebourbonconcierge.com. And you can even purchase in person at Revival Vintage Spirits, and even now with very few select stores in Kentucky. You can get it now while you can, but be sure to do it because it's not going to last long. Do you ever pour yourself a bourbon, swirl it around, and then start struggling to come up with tasting notes? And perhaps you're also looking for a good Father's Day gift idea. Well, you can now solve both with a kit from Knows Your Bourbon. And unlike other nosing kits on the market, Knows Your Bourbon kits feature real ingredients for the most authentic aromas. You can smell real Tahitian vanilla bean instead of some synthetic aroma that's just made from chemicals. So head on over to knowsyourbourbon.com and enter code BP10 for 10% off your order. From their bar to yours, Chad and Sarah of the popular YouTube channel It's Bourbon Night bring you their favorite at-home old-fashioned mix with the new Elemental Elixir's Golden Hour Syrup. It's a custom-made syrup with notes of bold black tea, warm spices, and orange zest. All you need is your favorite whiskey and ice. No bitters needed. One bottle makes 16 drinks, so that's only $1 a cocktail before you add your own whiskey. They can also be enjoyed in other cocktails or spirits, mocktails, coffee, tea, and anything you can think of. It's crafted locally in Lexington, Kentucky, and you can get your bottle now at whiskeyambitions.com.
Welcome back again to another episode of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. My name is Kenny, and I'm here again today with my co-host Ryan. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well, doing good. Just happy to be here at Four Roses. Excited to talk to Jim. Four Roses is one of my favorites. Like we talked about with Al, it's had a little history in my family, so it's cool to talk about the history and hear the stories.
Yeah, and the one thing I like about Four Roses is that their approach is very unique in the way that they do a lot with their single barrels and the labels, and it's one of those things that if you think of when it's in relation to, say, like wine country, when they think of, the barrels were facing the east quadrant and it had, the great
South Valley.
Yeah, they had all these different things, and Four Roses is definitely great about giving consumers that sort of information, right? So they're giving them that ability to understand. So we're very fortunate today that we are here with Jim Rutledge, who is the master distiller here at Four Roses. So, Jim, again, thank you first for being on the show today. It's definitely a pleasure and an honor to be sitting here with you. So I guess, when we start talking about this, I don't want to just jump right into Four Roses. We kind of want to learn about you a little bit. So I guess kind of give us an understanding of, what was your first experience with bourbon, right? Like, do you remember
what was that first bottle?
You remember that
like,
first
hey,
bottle, or what kind of made you like think of whiskey and moving into that industry?
Well, first of all, it's good to be here with you today. It's great having you here at Four Roses. But if anything, my first experience with bourbon would have driven me away from the industry, not to draw me to it. It wasn't good.
I think that's most of people's experiences. I remember sneaking bottles out of my dad's bar, and that was essentially my first experience. And you don't get appreciation for it at that point.
I was older than a lot of people, but I was probably 15 or 16 years old, and with a bunch of my friends, and they convinced me I looked older than everybody else. Not that I looked anywhere near 21, but somehow I was elected to go in and buy a bottle, and I walked by, and we only had a couple dollars, something like that, so I bought the cheapest half pint I could find, and it tasted it too. But I assumed back then that all bourbon tasted like that. It was not a good experience. And,
well, good. So I guess then how's that lead into I guess your time before I guess should I say with Four Roses into Seagrams and all this thing, and I guess what was your stages and journey through different roles that you've had here?
Well, I grew up in Louisville, went to Atherton High School, what we call the old Atherton, which the new Atherton is now about 45, 50 years old, something like that. But so it was a long time ago. Went to the University of Louisville, started off in the sciences, chemistry, physics, took some calculus hours for whatever reason, probably had 15 hours of that.
It's those engineering degrees. Those are the worst with math.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought at first I wanted to do computer science, and they said I had to have 4 years of math, and it's like, well, that's an easy decision to switch over to a business major when you hear that.
Well, I went through that for about 2 years and bored to death, and I guess I had visions of spending a lifetime with a white coat in a basement somewhere, some kind. So anyway, I was bored with it. Switched over to business school, got a marketing degree with a few more hours in marketing that I had in chemistry. If they offered degrees in science rather than specifics, combined physics, chemistry, I'd have had more hours. But so I had major degrees in marketing. I think I've had 3 or 4 more hours in marketing than I had in chemistry. So after graduating, I didn't want to jump at the first job offer I had. And through school, I've worked at Sears, the original Sears Roebuck, way before you guys' times. I was down on between 7th and 8th and Broadway. And I worked a couple of years there, just helped pay them for some expenses going to school. And I stayed there for close to a year, I guess, after I graduated, and looking for a career opportunity. And after what I thought was a long time back then, I had 2 good offers in the same day. One was Seagram, and the other was Philip Morris on 18th Street.
So
and
basically,
I made the right choice.
Which sin did you want to go with at the time?
Exactly, yeah, exactly, and that's my 2 offers. And so I started with Seagram and the research and development with Seagram's headquarters in North America, both Canadian and U.S. operations. R&D was centered or located in Louisville, Kentucky. So that's where I got my start. And my first job there was running gin stills, testing. That was our method back then of testing and approving the gin botanicals that were to be used in our gin production. And I would distill a gin botanical every day, and then after it was distilled, either that afternoon or the next morning, we would just approve it or not approve it based on how it smelled. And that was my first job, working in R&D. Didn't stay there too long. I went out and was transferred out into the plant operations, and my first supervisory job was in Seagram's Case Good Warehouse. This is the Seagram's Calvert Distillery on 7th Street Road, 7th and Central, right, just a few blocks from Churchill Downs. We spent a lot of time there in the afternoons. But
It's a good way to kill your afternoon. Take grandma a paycheck, go spend some money on some horses, and
back then wasn't like today. We left pretty much on time, or sneak out a little bit early. We could catch the last 2 races every afternoon for free. So a bunch of us would run down there. But anyway, I worked for a while in case goods shipping, worked in bottling, a little bit in warehousing, just about every area of production. Became working as a bottling planner, planning all the line schedules of the many products we were bottling and the sizes based on case good orders. And I was bottling floor leader, assistant bottling superintendent, and then became finished goods warehouse superintendent. We'd gone away from the old case goods shipping department and built a new, very modern palletized warehouse. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then I got the bad news being transferred to New York. That was in November 1977. I had 2 years, two years, I wish. I had 2 weeks to, still makes me nervous. And I had 2 weeks to
pack up shop and get everything
get
out
up
there.
to New York. And we had a home. Wife stayed back and was selling the house. And I went up there, and I thought the world would come to an end, but it was back at a time when I either took the transfer or took a hike. I no longer had a job because my replacement as finished goods warehouse superintendent was waiting right outside the plant manager's office. I remember that day. I'll never forget that day. I was in a bowling league. A week before, I didn't do too well, and I was sneaking early to get a couple games or 1 or 2 games in.
A lot of gutter balls.
And somebody caught me and said, Jim, plant manager wants you to see you. I said, how in the world did he know I was sneaking out of the plant early to go bowl? And I went down there, and it was pretty devastating. And but I ended up going to New York. I was transferred up as chief industrial engineer. After a while, became production division budget manager for all the overhead operating budgets for all the operating distilleries in the United States. And then when we started getting computers, I was the first person when I went up there, we did everything manually. But not this modern calculator like I have here right now that I've had since 1980, but on these great big huge machines, and but we do everything manually on the budgets. And when computers came out, I put everything on laptops or computers, and it wasn't laptops back then. In fact, we shared computers in the New York offices.
Punch cards and all that sort of stuff back then.
It was like a tabletop computer like we have now, but it was I don't know how they operated, but I have to go through everything on all the calculations. Then I hit a calculation key and go back and sit in the office for half hour to an hour waiting on the calculations to complete because it was being shared throughout that building I was working in. So anyway, got everything on. Once we got the computers upgraded, then I added distillery planning, long-range distillery planning to what I was doing, and which got me a little bit back into something related to production division and distillery operations, and that was, which I failed to mention, I had 2 different stints as a distillery shift supervisor when I was after came out of R&D. So,
and what distillery was that for at the time?
Well, it was still the Seagrams Calvert Distillery in Louisville. It's 7th Central. And throughout all the years I was in New York, every year at annual review, I was reporting to and asked if I had any questions. I said, well, I just have one thing to say and ask, and that is if there's ever an opportunity to get back into distillery operations, I would sincerely appreciate at least being considered for it. I missed operations. People in New York, of course, couldn't begin to understand why somebody has an opportunity every day to wear a 3-piece suit and a tie to work would ever want to go work back in a dirty distillery. And, of course, our distilleries aren't, whether it be ours or anyone, we're not dirty, but that's the perception they had. And but after quite a few years, I did get an opportunity. In 1990, he came to me and asked me if I'd been serious all those years about wanting to get back into distillery operations. And And I just looked at him and said, "No, of course not. I've just been kidding you all these years." And he knew I was serious.
It's the longest running joke ever, right?
Yeah.
So he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, things have worked out so well with you up here. I'm thinking about retiring within the next 1 to 2 years. Before I go, I'm going to do everything I can to fulfill that dream of getting back into distillery operations." So I did get back to Kentucky in 1992.
Who gave you that opportunity?
This guy I worked with, his name is Stanley Birchall. I enjoyed working for him. He was an amazing man, full of energy, enthusiasm, but his integrity, credibility, respect, above anybody I've ever worked for. And he taught me a lot about the business world and life to me. People often ask me, who's your mentor in distillery operations? And it's hard to understand when I say my boss in New York, Stanley Birchall. And because he taught me more than he taught me a lot about life. I've always been, good is never good, perfectionist, good is never good enough, and he was worse than me. So it was quite a combination. and during budget work, I carried some things out to 4 or 5 decimal places.
Right.
Because that meant when you're talking about millions and millions of units, that could mean something. If I made a mistake in a 3rd or 4th decimal place, he would find it. And all these numbers. And but it put me on my toes, made me better. And I think, appreciated working for each other. I know I worked for him, appreciated working for him. And we still stay in touch. And, of course, he's been retired a lot of years now, but he retired young, about 58 or so. And super guy. He influenced me more than anybody in my career.
Good. So Four Roses, when you came back in 1990, is that about what happened?
92. I came
92.
back.
It was still domestic only.
Oh, yeah. We were still part of Seagram. And when I got back, I became the Kentucky area manager or assistant manager in charge of all administratives. I was asked if I could come straight to the distillery. I said, I've been out of this for close to 15 years. I need to sort of ease back into that. It's not fair. I said, I'd love to, but it won't be fair for the people that are working for me if I go in and just take over and being away from it for so long. Mm-hmm. And so I eased back into it. And actually in 90, I worked down at our Cox's Creek facility, did all the budget works, operating standards for all the Kentucky area. Then in 94, I was transferred to here to the distillery and became master distiller in January 95. So it was good progression, getting my feet wet back in production operations after being away from so long. And, it's been a success story ever since. That I actually started Four Roses Bourbon, was purchased by Seagram in 1943. And then Seagram, of course, was a blended whiskey company. They introduced a new blended whiskey to add to their vast portfolio of brands back in 1945 and called it Four Roses. It looked like our yellow label, Four Roses, slightly paler label, Four Roses at the top of the label, red roses, the logo, and then instead of saying bourbon below the red roses, it said premium. In small print below the premium said a blend of 100% American whiskeys. So it was a good blend of whiskey when it was first introduced. And so the bourbon, that was in 1945, Four Roses Bourbon had become the number 1 selling bourbon in the U.S. immediately following the repeal of Prohibition and stayed that way through the 30s, the 40s, and most of the 50s. Now, back in all those years, 30s, 40s, 50s, and probably halfway or more through the 60s, blended whiskeys were all considered top shelf brands, where bourbon as a category was considered down near the bottom. But that was primarily because the giant in the industry was Seagram. Mm-hmm. They'd been putting away, I think it's a little over 6 years of barrel inventories, awaiting the day that Prohibition would go away. It had to go away because it generated so many more problems than ever abated. It had to go away. So they were the overnight giant because everybody else was starting from scratch. Even these 6 distilleries that were
they had their licenses or whatever.
Well, there was a permit to sell. not to produce. There was only one distillery that stayed open to produce for all of them. They weren't producing except for one time during Prohibition. And one distillery made, based on each distillery's mash bill, grain recipe, and yeast, they produced for each of the distilleries at one distillery location. That was the Stitzel distillery, not yet Stitzel Weller. They hadn't combined, but it was a Stitzel distillery that stayed operational, but it only ran once to replenish barrel inventories. But of those 6 of the inventories, their inventories were relatively small. And Seagram was this giant, and it was their influence that put blended whiskeys up at the top shelf. And the Brofman family, who started, Sam Brofman started Seagram and purchased the Joseph E. Seagram distillery in 1926, right around that time anyway. And they were not fans of straight whiskeys of any kind. Mm-hmm. It was blended whiskeys. And so back in those, when I started...
They tried to create the premium category for themselves, right? This is what I prefer, and this is what everybody else is too. They didn't try to create
it. It was the premium category. And, there was, like Seagram brands, when I started in 1966, Seagram 7, now that was not a Canadian blended whiskey. It was made in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, in Relay, which is a suburb of Baltimore and Maryland. But that was selling close to 12 million cases a year domestically. That's numbers everybody just shakes their head. I mean, it's totally unheard of today. But Seagram also had Crown Royal, Seagram VO, and there was other distilleries, Canadian Club, for example. They dominated the whiskey market back in those years.
And probably 7-Up, too. A lot of people
7 and 7. Yeah. 7 and 7. I remember my first 7-7. I knew what 7-Up was, but that other stuff sort of ruined the 7-Up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point-of-sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. Shopify's point-of-sale is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. And with Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers in line and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns, from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. And get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone. Transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's point-of-sale Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/bourbon, all lowercase, and go to shopify.com/bourbon to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/bourbon. If you're anything like me, then you can't get enough about bourbon. And that's why I'm a subscriber to Bourbon Plus magazine. Bourbon Plus is a quarterly publication that tells the stories from the heart of bourbon, the farmers who grow the grain, the distillers who labor over the process, and the people like you and me who raise their glasses to celebrate it all. Subscribe to Bourbon Plus magazine today at bourbonplus.com, that's PLUS.com, and use code PURSUIT at checkout for $5 off your subscription.
So let's move a little bit forward to when Kirin came in the picture, right?
Well, Seagram, I started trying to bring, even when I was working in New York, Seagram sold all of its bourbons in 1988 to devote all of its barrel inventory for bourbon to the one growth market in the U.S., and the Japanese market had shot through the roof. And so we sold a lot of well-known brands today, bourbons. And I started immediately trying to get bourbon back to the U.S., and it became a burning passion once I got to the distillery. And I had ongoing debates. It was never, ever going to end with Seagram marketing. I worked up there for a number of years, and I didn't know most of the guys I was talking with, but I wasn't intimidated because somebody worked in New York. And so we had this ongoing debate, and it was really not going to happen. It was a long story, and things that we could talk about it, but it really, unfortunately, didn't happen until Seagram was announced in December 1999. Seagram had purchased Mr. Sam Brofman. We called him Mr. Sam. When he died in, I think it was July 71, turned it over to his son, Edgar. And when Edgar Brofman was retiring, he, in the late 80s, he turned the operation of Seagram over to one of his sons, Edgar Jr. And Edgar Jr.'s his priorities in life and goals and his enjoyment in life were the arts, whether it be music or film, theater. And Seagram eventually had purchased Universal Studios. And so we owned that. And toward the end of the 90s, when AOL and Time Warner were merging, Edgar Jr. thought that, well, to protect our stockholders, we've got to do something. So he merged with this company in France called Vivendi. And that was in, December 99. It was announced that Seagram was going out of business. The first move, we then became known as Vivendi Universal. And the first thing we heard out of Vivendi Universal was that we're no longer interested in the distilled spirits or beverage alcohol business. We're selling it.
Pretty sure they gave a scare to everyone at that point.
It sure did. It was a tough 2 years. And I met with all of our employees probably, if it wasn't every week, it was very close to every week. I didn't know much more than anybody else. But I was a Kentucky area manager, and people, in Kentucky, I guess they thought I would know, and I really didn't know anything else. But going through a crisis like that in people's lives, it's good to have a sounding board, and I would just stand and listen and let them beat me over the head for a couple of years. It was a hard 2 years for all of us. And in December 2001, Seagram was out of the business. We had Seagram's brands went two different directions, Diageo and Pernod Ricard. We were in the Pernod Ricard group, but took 2 years to consummate the sale because Seagram were in every country around the world that allowed beverage alcohols, and just about everybody had to pass our equivalent of the Fair Trade Commission. That's why it took 2 years. Well, the European Union did not approve the sale of the 39% of the brands that went to Pernod Ricard unless they divested of Four Roses because of our presence in Europe, which we were the top-selling bourbon in most of those countries. So it went up for sale, and locally it was put on market. It was a bidding process, blind bidding process, 3-stage blind bidding. And Brown-Forman was bidding. Buffalo Trace and Heaven Hill entered into a partnership agreement. Constellation Brands, primarily the wine company that owned Barton, was bidding on it back then. And I think Campari got in late, and Kirin got in. Kirin was the distributor of Four Roses bourbon for Seagram in Japan, and they didn't want to lose that business. And it was a top-selling bourbon in Japan. So they jumped in, and they ended up purchasing. And my first question of Kirin, I'd met people a couple of times. I'd given all these bidding groups, including Kirin, tours of the distillery, answered their questions. I couldn't ask questions of them. And actually, I always introduce this guy standing beside me. I can't remember his name, but this is so-and-so, the Price Waterhouse cop, making sure I was being fair to everybody, not telling one person something was anybody else.
I know a few people work for PwC, so I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go ahead and write that one down. Yeah, I'm gonna use that one later.
But it was, it was a reasonable thing because I couldn't be, and I had no intention of being unfair to somebody else, being fair to everyone. So anyway, I knew who was eventually. I'd given all the tours, and I'd heard when back in late fall of 2001 who was going to be the winning bidder, and it was Kirin. And so I met with some of them one time. They just were asking questions, and they came back in first week of January 2002, and they were here for a couple of days asking questions. They were getting ready to go up to New York to negotiate some ancillary agreements with Diageo, Pernod Ricard, and some others. And finally, they asked Jim-san, would you have any questions of us? And, of course, my first question, I didn't tell them what I thought of the blend of whiskey Seagram had with our name on the bottle, because it had become a very bottom shelf, inexpensive, not very good, being polite, blend of whiskey. And I said, Seagram has a blend of whiskey that's not made in Kentucky, has nothing to do with our distillery, but except it ruined our name that we once had.
A little tarnishing.
Yeah, and but I said, are you willing to pull that off the market, make it go away, let us bring our bourbon back home, where we used to be the number one selling bourbon in the U.S. And I said back then, I said, given an opportunity and given some time, I am absolutely convinced that eventually the United States, which we've been out of for years, and the Four Roses name had been tarnished by the blend of whiskey, I was still so confident in the bourbon we could put in the bottles that I said, I'm confident, given time, that the United States will become the number one global market for Four Roses. And whether they probably didn't believe much of that, but
well, I'll tell you what, I think you're predicting the future. So if you go ahead and just write any 6 numbers down on a piece of paper, and I'm going to go ahead and just cash that in for $2 on Saturday and see what happens.
I can promise you that doesn't work. Based on experience. But I was very confident about that. And I think that will happen actually this year. That United States, all of a sudden, the last few years, and I've been trying to get us to prove putting more barrels of bourbon away every year. I could see this coming. And I guess I was confident. I guess some people around here thought I was crazy, and for thinking how far and how fast we could go. But I think we first started in our case sales in 2011. All of a sudden, we jumped 42% over the previous year. And people started, I said, well, this can't go on. Well, 2012, we jumped 58% over that number. And what's going on? I'm saying this is going to keep on. And I used to explain it. I was trying to get us to put more barrels away. I said, we're like this little bitty tiny snowball at the top of a mountain, just beginning to roll down this mountain right now. In a few years from now, it may be 25% or a third of the way down, but it's going to be so big, there's no stopping it. It's going to keep going. And I was still basing everything on the quality of the bourbon we could put in the bottle. The labels, the bottles are important. That sells one bottle, but what's inside, to me, sells the 5th, the 10th, the 20th, and so forth. And
it's the crack effect, right? Getting that little taste, and they're just going to keep on coming back, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, it's but that's the way I felt anyway. So now we up 42% in 11, 58% in 12. 2013, we jumped 71% over 12. And then last year, the end of 2014, people began to take note. We jumped to 71%. So, oh my gosh, this is really happening. Yeah, it's, the bourbon market, those numbers sound huge. They are huge. But remember, we're just now back in the U.S., and we're starting from this small base. Now, these huge numbers might be a very small percentage with the giants in the industry. Mm-hmm. But that just means that we have that much further to grow. It's more opportunities, and it's going to keep on.
Yeah.
And
I guess so. What are you most excited for in the future of what's going to happen with Four Roses with this bourbon boom that is happening?
Well, we're going to have to get through a tight stretch 2 or 3 years from now. We're going to be pretty tight
inventory wise. Yeah.
And but we are. I mean, here we were when we were part of Seagram. The biggest majority of what we produced at this distillery, some of our bourbon was shipped into Canada because of the smoothness and mellowness of the bourbon we produce here, became flavoring components for brands like Crown Royal, Seagram VO, and some other blended whiskeys, even in Seagram 7. We had the Four Roses bourbon market in Europe and Japan, but the majority of what we were doing was blended whiskeys. So we've taken all this, what we were doing for Four Roses bourbon, and then when you're talking about a small percentage in Seagram 7, when they're doing 4 or 5 million cases a year we were down to by then. That's a lot of flavoring, a lot of gallons. And so all that's gone away, of course. And now we're to the point where we will need to almost double the capacity of our distillery.
Right. So, I mean, are there
it's
plans?
exciting. We're working on that.
Right.
And we're going to have to build a new bottling facility. We're going to have to build warehouses down the road, distillery operations. These are all in the planning stages now. Nothing's been cast in stone.
Because these aren't cheap things to do either. As
No,
most
that's
people
why
would
it
understand.
takes some time. It takes some time. You want to make the decisions right and not make any mistakes in doing these things. So
It's got to be hard forecasting 8-10 years down the road. So it's like,
it's I wish I was doing this for all the when I was doing the distillery planning in New York. I was doing it for all the distillery whether it be one of 50 or 60 Seagram blended whiskeys. All the bourbons they had, the straight rye they had, anything with whiskey or gin or vodka, I was doing the planning for all of it. And gin and vodka is easy because you can distill it today and bottle it tomorrow. But anything that goes in a barrel, light whiskey as a flavoring component for a blended whiskey, had to be aged a minimum of 4 years. That's by law. Mm-hmm. And then the bourbons, the rye, corn whiskeys, barley bourbons. All these components made at all the distilleries, long-range planning, and it's a challenge. And it's, whose crystal ball is better than the next person's, and you got to base it on experience. Of course, people in marketing are very optimistic.
right.
People in production are conservative. So, and I was trying to balance the two, and that's what we still sort of do the same thing right now. Whose crystal ball is best?
Right.
And if you make a mistake, you can either have a facility that's twice what you need, or half of what you need, or
or you guess right,
or your existing
you gotta roll the
facility.
dice.
That's right. So, but I think it's the growth we've experienced in the last few years, and we've got so far to go. It's going to be sustained for so long. We talk now, and you hear people talking about we have more barrels of bourbon in Kentucky than we have people. Somewhere around, and I don't know exactly what it is.
I've also heard that we have more barrels aging than we have people and horses combined. So I've heard a lot.
No, I don't think so. I've seen a lot of horses around, and it could be maybe thoroughbred horses.
Maybe
it could be, but don't we? I think the population somewhere around 4.3 million, some plus or minus, and we have over 5 million barrels in inventory right now. So 700,000 plus or minus horses. I don't know how many horses. That's a lot. That's a pretty big herd of horses.
We'll ballpark something.
But you go back, and 40% of that now. See, it's not only growth in the U.S. 40% of those barrels are designated for international markets. So 3 million are designated for use in the U.S. satisfy U.S. demands. 40%, 2 million. In international markets. And you go back to the late 60s when only about 5% of the bourbon that was being produced in Kentucky was being shipped overseas. We had about 9 million barrels in inventory versus 3 million now. So we've got 3 times growth 3 times, and we'll catch up about where we were relative to what's in the U.S. And so it's going to be sustained for years to come. I think it started when the distilleries, we didn't really change anything we were doing in the 80s when we started focusing on premium bourbon brands like single barrel bourbons, small batch bourbons. Blanton's was the first, was that 82 or 83, somewhere around there, and then the Jim Beam series, small batch series in 87, around that time. Booker, of course, Booker Noe, the famous master distiller, Basil Hayden, helped me, Knob Creek, and then what am I missing? Baker's, right. Those 4, and then everybody started chiming in, doing the same thing, focusing on, this is how good we are, and that's how we got the message out. And so that slowed the decline that we've been having for 20 years, began to level off. And by the end of the 90s, we began to grow. And then this century so far, the last 15 years, has just been phenomenal. It keeps growing. And a lot of it started, I think, and has continued because people have begun to see around the world that we are a premium whiskey, and there is another whiskey in this world besides Scotch, and it's Kentucky bourbon. And so we've got a long way to go. And so we're just beginning. This
Right.
growth, I really believe that's going to be sustained for years and years and years to come, because people finally begun to realize how good and versatile bourbon is. And I mean, skies are ceiling. And
Right. It's going to keep going.
It's going to keep going.
And that completes episode 1 of the 2-part series with Jim Rutledge from Four Roses. If you want to follow us on Instagram at Bourbon Pursuit, also on Twitter at Bourbon Pursuit. I think I said everything, but Kenny usually does that, and I forget. I don't know. Anyways, we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.